podcasting from a little cabin on a hill. This is the Stacy Westfall Podcast. Stacy's goal is simple: to teach you to understand why horses do what they do, as well as the action steps for creating clear, confident communication with your horses.
Hi, I'm Stacy Westfall, and I'm here to teach you how to understand, enjoy, and successfully train your own horses. In last week's episode, I talked about the rider's aids and the rider's willingness to use their aids. In this week's episode, we're going to explore finding your weakest aid. Do you know which one of your aids is the weakest? Or which one you're overusing? For today's discussion, I'm going to define the rider's aids as the right hand, right leg, and left leg. We all know there's a lot more involved. We know that we can use seat and voice and all kinds of other things, but just to simplify today, we're going to picture somebody on the horse riding, not doing groundwork, and we're going to picture how they're balancing right hand, right leg, left leg. When you understand that you can use all four of these aids and you become very effective with them, you will become a more balanced rider. An interesting thing during this discussion that you're going to hear come up is the difference between going on a straight line or going on a circle. For this discussion, we're going to talk about these four aids, and we're going to talk about riding a circle. When you ride a circle, it's going to require the horse to be balanced, and it's going to require more navigation on your part. And so it's going to make it more clear what's going on. On a straight line, there is the need to balance, and it is very difficult, like in an arena. But a lot of times when I say a straight line, people think more about, remember that podcast a while back, I talked about active versus passive riding. A lot of times straight lines are incorrectly ridden, meaning they're just kind of like the horse is like pointed in a direction and sent there, but not guided or balanced between the aids. I'm not going to go super deep into that idea right now, but it's just to say that, for example, when I trail ride, I'm guilty all day long of just pointing the horse down the trail and just kind of letting it kind of freewheel. I talked a little bit about that in that active versus passive podcast. When we ride in a circle, let's go ahead and for right now, let's just picture that you're riding your horse in a circle to the left. The circle to the left, let's make that somewhere between the size of a lunge line circle or maybe a little bit bigger. So maybe that's 40 feet wide or up to 60 or 70 feet wide. We're not trying to make this a super small circle. We're just trying to say that it's a purposeful circle. And when we ride on that, let's just say it's a 50-foot circle. We'll split the difference here, and we'll go with a 50-foot circle. We'll say that because we're riding on that circle, we're going to be steering more and planning more so that we get that pretty round. Now, think about this, though. Don't do this inside your round pen. If you do this inside your round pen, you're going to be cheating just a little bit because the horse might use that rail, or pretty much for sure will use that rail for guidance. So this is better done in the middle of a riding arena or out in a flat part in your pasture, or if it's really muddy right now, I've had some people that have been saying, hey, I've got kind of a flat spot in my driveway, because you don't have to do this at speed. You can even just do this at a walk. I think I may have mentioned I prefer and like a trot or a jog for a lot of other things, but this one, you're just kind of feeling out how you're using your aids. You could totally do this at a walk. So now you're picturing that you're on your horse, you're riding to the left on a circle that's about 50 feet across. When you're doing that, you're going to have four choices of aids. Now, we're also going to say we're going to keep that horse bent on the shape of that circle. And here's what we have to start thinking about. Well, if the horse is going around and the most common aid people are going to use is the inside rein, in this case, the left rein, to pull the horse in. And the next strongest aid, I would say I see over and over again, would be the outside leg, possibly helping to bring that horse in. The two weakest aids I see over and over again are the inside leg and the outside rein. Now, as you imagine you're riding this horse around this imaginary circle to the left, you can imagine that if the horse had been in a bigger circle and you were bringing it in, you would very naturally use that inside, that left hand to guide that horse in. What happens here that's interesting is that if the horse doesn't follow, sometimes, people will use that left rein to guide the horse in. If the horse doesn't follow, they'll use some outside leg and help push that horse in. Now, what happens is if the horse overshoots that 50-foot mark and goes smaller, what a lot of people do to bring the horse out is they go ahead and they use the right rein to pull the horse out. But in doing so, they very often will totally switch the bend. So when they pull the horse's head to the right and pull the horse back out, let's say it fell into a 40-foot circle instead of a 50-foot circle, when they go to bring that horse back out, they very often let that horse completely switch the bend. So the horse is no longer matching the bend of a 50-foot circle going to the left. The rider will pull the head to the right and effectively switch the bend. Well, as soon as you switch the bend like that, that's now your new inside rein. So that right rein is effectively acting like it's that bend and direction rein. So it's now your new inside rein. So this is why when we're going around on this circle to the left, if that horse falls in to the circle too much and goes down onto a 40-foot circle instead of a 50-foot circle, if we keep the horse's bend going to the left, then we're going to need to think of how can we bring that horse out to the right but still maintain that bend. Now what we're going to do is we're going to think, okay, just to talk about the hands, we're going to use both legs as gas pedals, so we're going to use both legs evenly to keep the horse moving forward. The inside hand is going to be your bending hand, and then that outside right hand would move out, and let's pretend we're sitting on the horse, and when we're sitting on the horse, if the horse's head is straight ahead of it, then it's 12 o'clock. And so if you're sitting on top of the horse, if you took your right arm straight to the side, that would be 3 o'clock. And if you took your left hand straight out to the side, that would be 9 o'clock. And so if you're riding around on this horse, if you've got the horse bending to the left and the horse is falling into like a 30-foot circle, we're going to take that right hand out towards 2 or 3 o'clock, but you're still going to hold the bend with your inside left rein. And what this is going to do is this is now going to give you an inside bending rein and an outside rein that's going to be leading that shoulder out. And this is when you're going to start to find out what aids are working and which ones are out of balance. Now, in the example I just said, I said, let's use both legs evenly, but I'll tell you what happens most of the time is that if that horse is supposed to be on a 50-foot circle to the left with a left bend, and the horse oversteers when the rider brought that horse in to the 50-foot circle, and the horse oversteers, or the rider oversteers, I don't care who we say did it, when that horse oversteers in to the 30-foot circle, if the rider tries to keep the bend to the inside, what they'll do a lot of times is they'll get really active with the inside leg and try to push that horse back out with that inside leg. Now, ultimately, it is a combination of these aids. So it would be, you could use that inside leg to drive that horse out to that outside hand and pick that horse back up out onto, lead that horse, keeping the bend to the inside, lead that horse's shoulder back out to that 50-foot circle. Now imagine, if you have to rewind and listen to all that again, it's a lot happening. So imagine that you're riding on that 50-foot circle and you've got the horse bending to the inside just enough to shape it onto that 50-foot circle, and the horse is pretty balanced between your aids. What I want you to think about is without the horse necessarily falling in or out, which one of those aids do you think you're using a lot more or a lot less? I totally realize that this is going to depend on if the horse is pulling towards the barn or falling in. But for this example, we're going to say that instead of this horse really diving in 10 feet or pulling out 10 feet, we're just going to say this horse maybe has a little bit of a wobble. So you're on that circle and your horse is subtly thinking about falling in. Do you think that you would first move towards, which aid do you think you would first move towards to bring that horse back out? And what I start to find as I watch horses and riders working together is that, number one, the riders tend to use their inside rein a lot. Again, we're going to say that if you're going to a circle to the left and that horse goes in too much, the rider will automatically use what sounds like the outside rein, but because they let the bend change, I'm going to argue that became a new inside rein. And so they end up with this when they go to pull the horse back out and they change the bend. You end up with this snaky kind of a feeling with the horse because the horse is bent to the left, then it's bent to the right. Then you're trying to bring it back onto that bend to the left. So you bring it back to the bend to the left, falls in a little bit too much. So they bend it back out to the right. So what they're doing is they're using effectively inside rein all the time. If you think about that, every time they change the bend, it becomes a new inside rein. Big concept there. So what's happening is typically I see that the inside rein is the strongest aid. The outside leg tends to be the second strongest aid. The next strongest aid tends to be the outside rein. And then the weakest aid I tend to see is the inside leg. And when you start riding around and exploring this idea on a circle, it can be really eye-opening. I personally do this to myself even now when I ride, because you have to be aware of what aids you might be overusing or underusing. I don't have as much of a tendency to bring that horse in and start switching the bend. I'm very aware of the bend or not the bend. But there are times that I'm aware that I might have one aid carrying more and putting in more effort than it should be. So it's out of balance. An example of that might mean that if I were asking the horse to turn to the left, a very common mistake or out of balance thing would be, the rider might use a lot of left hand to take the horse to the left, but not follow that with leg. So the horse needs to have kind of an equal amount of gas pedal to the steering. And another place that I might find myself doing it would be maybe I am turning to the left and I feel that horse drifting in just a little bit too much. So I would keep the bend with my inside hand and I would pick up my outside rein and float that hand out. But maybe I don't use that inside leg quite as strong. So I'll say use both legs to drive that horse forward. In a lot of situations, I'm saying use both legs to drive that horse forward, as opposed to using that inside leg only and pushing the horse out. A lot of times I'll say use both legs evenly. A lot of this depends on the training stage of the horse, meaning like, is this horse in the 5th grade or is this horse in college? It matters how we're going to use these aids. But for this example, let's say I'm telling myself I'm going to use both legs evenly and I'm going to lift up my outside hand to draw this horse to the outside. I have to question myself, am I actually using them both evenly? Or am I using one a little bit more than the other? So there's this awareness cycle that is constantly happening as I'm using these aids and I'm thinking, I told myself I wanted to use both legs evenly and then emphasize opening that hand. Did I really do that? Or did I let that inside leg get a lot stronger? And then that outside rein didn't really have to do the work of drawing that horse out. Because in the end, there's two ways we can look at this. We can look at the fact that as I'm riding around on this 50-foot circle to the left, I would like to think that I could be trotting around and I could be going inside rein, outside rein, inside leg, outside leg. And as I was trotting around there, I could actually be thinking, am I using these all about even? Or am I leaving one of these doors open? Or am I overusing one? Let's just say it's the outside rein this time, and underusing one. Let's say that's that inside leg. And so it's very fascinating to double check how in balance and aware you are of those 4 aids as you're using them. If you do a lot of trail riding and you're possibly guilty of what I've said I am possibly guilty of, which is kind of pointing that horse down the trail and letting it cruise, I'm telling you, that is a hard place to figure out if you're using one aid weaker than the others, because it's very common when you're headed straight down that trail to be constantly switching that bend like I described on the circle. You can picture it if you're picturing riding down your favorite 50-foot stretch of trail, that it'd be pretty easy to have a little wobble where you pulled the horse a little to the right, a little to the left, letting that horse change bend every time you did that. And what happens is you don't ever really establish an inside leg and an outside rein to be able to identify what could be weaker. If you do that frequently, what I would challenge you to do is I would say, just find a flat spot, whether it's out on the trail, whether it's in your pasture, whether it's at the parking lot before you head out onto the trail. Find a little place and do this little circle exercise and see which one of those aids doesn't feel like it's working. And here's a big hint. The weakest aid is the one your horse is usually going out through. So if your horse tends to be falling to the inside of a circle, there's a really good chance your inside leg is weaker. If your horse tends to be dragging you around in the steering, so you go to pull it to the left and it just doesn't really go there, it goes somewhere else, that could mean that inside rein could be weaker. A lot of times those horses are pointing towards whatever your weakest aid is because they're kind of taking advantage of it. They're not respecting it. They're going out through that door. If you want to look at each one of those aids as a door you can open or close, the horse will very frequently be walking straight out the door that you're leaving open because of that weaker aid. Now, if you're a more advanced rider, an interesting exercise is to ride around on something like that 50-foot circle. And you think, sure, I can ride around on a 50-foot circle. Now go around, and this time you're using all four evenly. Go ahead and for a moment, for a few strides. So if you're trotting around 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, on that count, momentarily lighten one of your aids and see what happens. So for example, if we're trotting on that 50-foot circle to the left and you're trotting around and you momentarily lighten your inside rein, does the horse kind of carry that, or does the horse zigzag somewhere? Because if the horse ducks or dives, there's a good chance that maybe you're holding on quite a bit with that aid because the horse really fell out of balance. You'll find in dressage terms that we're looking for something called self-carriage as we go along. And when I play around with this, I also put bridleless riding in the self-carriage category because they kind of sound like they fit. So you can imagine that if you momentarily lighten one aid, it would be interesting to see what would happen. Now, for example, if you momentarily lighten your inside rein, maybe you notice that your inside leg needs to do a touch more to keep that horse clear, but you need to just be aware of it. So I'd challenge you to go ahead and ride around and just go through and lighten each one of those aids for a moment. So you're trotting 1, 2, 3, 4. You lighten your inside left rein for a count of 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then you pick it back up and you think, okay, what just happened there? What did I have to adjust, or did we have a major change, or did the horse carry that along? Then you do the same thing. You go around, you lighten the outside rein for a count of 1, 2, 3, or maybe 4, and you see what happened there. And as you go through, a lot of times you'll find that there's one aid that when you lighten it, you really notice a difference, and that's because that's the aid you're overusing. And then you'll find another aid, usually a parallel one. So it might be like, again, parallel inside rein, outside leg, or you'll find that that opposite one might be the one that's the weakest. Guys, I threw a whole bunch at you. I went really fast. If it's too fast, send me a question. If it was right on par and you were able to keep up, let me know that in the comments too, because I love teaching and blasting through material, but I can't really read your faces right now to tell whether you have that slightly fuzzy, confused look or that slightly dawning light bulb awareness, or if you're jumping up and down. I can't actually see you. So go ahead. Thanks for joining me today. Leave a comment and let me know what effect that just had on you, and I'll talk to you in the next episode. Thanks.
If you enjoy listening to Stacy's podcast, please visit stacywestfall.com for articles, videos, and tips to help you and your horse succeed.